The old cash register drawer slid open with a hollow ding, and my world tilted on its axis for the second time in a single lifetime. $500 short. The neat stacks of 20s, 10s, and 5s I had meticulously organized just hours before were decimated, leaving a gaping hole that mirrored the one being carved out in my chest. My fingers, trembling, flew to my neck, closing around the familiar shape of the vintage brass key hanging from its simple silver chain. I had touched it this morning, a silent prayer for luck, for a fresh start. I knew this day was the pivot point. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that my life was about to be reborn from the ashes of a fire I was forced to walk through once before. It was happening again. The betrayal, the lies, the sickening, familiar taste of being framed by the very people I trusted. The back door of the cafe burst open, slamming against the stoppers and making me jump. Manager Rick stormed in, his greasy hair plastered to his forehead and his cheap suit rumpling around his pudgy frame. Right behind him, her face a perfect mask of wide-eyed concern, was Jessica, my best friend. "Maya, thank God," she breathed, rushing to my side. "Rick said the deposit was short. I told him it had to be a mistake." Her hand landed on my arm, but her touch felt like ice. $516 to be exact, Rick grunted, his eyes scanning the empty cafe as if the missing money might be hiding under a table. He loomed over the register, his gaze falling on me with theatrical disappointment. "Care to explain, Maya?" I I don't know, I stammered, my voice sounding small and weak, even to my own ears. I balanced the drawer after the dinner rush. It was perfect, I swear. "Oh, I'm sure it was," Rick said, his lip curling into a sneer. "Jessica, call up the security feed from the last hour." Jessica nodded, her brow furrowed with fake diligence, as she tapped at the tablet behind the counter. "It's weird," she said after a moment, turning the screen toward Rick. "The camera feed from this angle, the one right over the register, it seems to have cut out for about 15 minutes, right around closing time." Of course it did. My breath caught in my throat. I could see the whole scene play out in my mind, a ghost of a memory from another life. The setup, the convenient technical glitch, the accusation. "But the camera from the front door works just fine," Rick added, his voice dripping with false authority. "And it shows you, Maya, as the only person behind this counter for the last hour." He looked from me to Jessica, a silent shared signal passing between them. I think we all know what happened here. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and useless. "Rick, no. I've worked for you for 3 years. I've never even been $1 short. You know me." "I thought I did," he said, his voice cold. "I'm sorry, Maya. I have to let you go. We can't employ a thief." The word hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. "Thief!" Jessica gasped, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a cage. "Oh, Maya, I'm so, so sorry," she whispered against my hair, her voice thick with crocodile tears. "This is a nightmare. Don't worry, I'll talk to him. I'll try to smooth things over." As she held me, I felt her hand slip into the back pocket of my jeans, her fingers deftly sliding out the thin envelope containing my final cash paycheck. My tips. The last bit of money I had to my name, and the sheer audacity of it sent a jolt of ice through my veins, clearing away the fog of panic. This time, I wouldn't just cry. This time, I wouldn't just break. I pushed her away, my hands shaking with a rage so profound it felt like power. "Don't bother," I said, my voice flat and dead. I grabbed my worn jacket from its hook, not bothering to look at either of them as I walked toward the door. I didn't give them the satisfaction of another tear. The moment I stepped outside, the heavens opened up, drenching me in a cold, relentless downpour. The rain plastered my thin uniform to my skin, and I stumbled down the alley, my mind a screaming void. I paused by the cafe's side window, hidden by the deep shadows and the cascading water, just needing a second to breathe. That's when I heard it. Through the glass, muffled by the storm, came a sound that would forever be burned into my memory. Their laughter. Sharp, cruel, and triumphant. "I can't believe how easy that was," Jessica's voice chirped, stripped of all its fake sympathy. Her face, she looked like a lost puppy. "She bought the whole act." Rick's booming laugh followed. "Here's your cut. $250, just like we planned." The look on her face was worth the other half. I stood frozen in the rain, the water dripping from my hair like icy tears, but my eyes were bone dry. The shock and the hurt were still there, a deep, throbbing wound. But beneath it, something new was hardening. The familiar agony of their betrayal wasn't just pain anymore, it was fuel. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought I was the same weak, heartbroken girl they had ruined before. They were wrong. This time, I remembered everything. And this time, they would pay for it all. The first week was a blur of online applications and forced smiles. The second week was when the silence began to curdle into something more sinister. Two hiring managers who had sounded so promising on the phone suddenly went cold after checking my references. The third time it happened, the woman from the Daily Grind coffee house was kind enough to be honest. "Look, I'm not supposed to say anything," she said, her voice a low murmur. "But your old manager, Rick, he told me to stay far away. Said you had sticky fingers. I don't know what happened over there, kid, but he's poisoning the well for you all over town." The poison was spreading in other ways too. A text from a mutual acquaintance. "Hey, is it true what Jess is saying about you?" Whispers in the grocery store aisle. Old friends suddenly too busy to grab lunch. Jessica, my supposed best friend, was meticulously salting the earth of my entire social life, painting herself as the loyal friend who had been duped by a master manipulator. The final blow came not with a bang, but with a timid knock on my apartment door. It was my landlord, Mr. Henderson, a kind, balding man who always smelled faintly of mothballs. He twisted the brim of his hat in his hands, unable to meet my eye. "Maya, I'm so sorry," he began, his gaze fixed on a crack in the hallway plaster. I got a call from your friend Jessica." My stomach turned to lead. She was just so concerned, you see. Said she felt it was her duty to warn me about your situation, the trouble at the cafe, your new criminal tendencies. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of pity, which was somehow worse than accusation. "My wife, she's a worrier. We can't have that kind of liability in the building. I have to ask you to be out by the end of the month." And just like that, I was homeless. My meager savings were gone, swallowed by rent and bills. I had no job, no prospects, and now no apartment. There was only one place left to go. Moving back into my childhood bedroom was the ultimate humiliation. The faded floral wallpaper, the shelves of dusty debate club trophies, the faint, judgmental silence from my parents in the living room. It was all a suffocating blanket of failure. They didn't say, "I told you so," but it hung in the air, in my mother's tight-lipped smiles and my father's rustling newspaper. They believed the rumors, too. It was in that room, surrounded by the ghosts of a girl I used to be, that the grief finally hardened into a diamond-sharp point. The tears stopped. The despair receded. My new, steely resolve took its place. They had taken my job, my reputation, and my home. Now I would start taking things from them. My laptop became my secret war room. Every night while my parents slept, I'd sit cross-legged on my bed, the screen's glow illuminating my face. My first stop was Jessica's Instagram. Just as I knew she would, she couldn't resist showing off. It was her most predictable flaw: vanity. There it was. A new designer handbag posted 3 days after I was fired. Tagline, "Treat yourself. Hard work pays off." A week later, a lavish brunch with champagne, followed by a shopping spree. I screenshotted everything, meticulously documenting the dates and her gloating captions. I saved them in a folder on a thumb drive labeled accounting. Next was Rick. My past life, the one before this one, had taught me that men like him, lazy, greedy, and arrogant, always had bigger vices. A quick search of public county court records gave me what I needed. Rick Malden had a string of small claims court filings against him from online gambling sites. He wasn't just skimming from the register, he was drowning in debt. His desperation had made him sloppy. I saved the case numbers and screenshots to my thumb drive. The final piece of my quiet counterattack came from my own memory. During the chaotic final moments of my last shift, even as my world was imploding, a cold, clear part of my brain, the part that remembered, had taken over. As I'd grabbed my jacket, I'd accidentally knocked a stack of inventory binders to the floor. And when I'd picked them up, I'd made sure to put the daily temperature logs inside the dry goods receiving folder and shove the out-of-date cleaning schedules to the front of the compliance binder. Minor, petty acts of chaos a panicked employee might make. Or evidence of a poorly managed store for a corporate inspector to find. With my evidence gathered, I opened an anonymous, encrypted email account. I drafted a message to the regional vice president of operations for the entire cafe franchise, whose name I'd memorized from a corporate bulletin board months ago. To whom it may concern, I wrote, I am an employee in your district writing anonymously out of fear of retaliation. I have serious concerns about the management of the Northwood branch under Rick Malden. There are significant inventory discrepancies, and policy checklists are often pencil whipped. I also have reason to believe the manager's significant gambling debts may be affecting his professional judgment. I would urge you to conduct a surprise audit. I hit send. The email disappeared into the digital ether. It was a single silent shot fired in the dark, but I knew it would hit its mark. They had pushed me out, hoping I would disappear. They didn't realize they had only given me the space I needed to plan my return. My life became a patchwork of grim temp jobs. One week I was filing invoices in a stuffy office. The next I was restocking shelves on the graveyard shift. The lowest point came during the Founders Day picnic, where I was hired to serve lukewarm hot dogs and scoop potato salad from giant plastic tubs. The sun beat down, the air smelled of sweat and cheap mustard, and my uniform shirt was already sticking to my back when I saw them. Jessica, looking radiant in a breezy sundress, was laughing up at my ex-boyfriend, Tom. He had his arm slung casually around her shoulder. Tom and I had dated for 2 years. We'd broken up amicably 6 months before I was fired, but there was still a tender bruise where our relationship used to be. Seeing him with her felt like she'd found that exact bruise and pressed down with all her might. They strolled over to my food station, Jessica's smile widening as she recognized me. "Oh, Maya, I didn't know you were working here," she said, her voice dripping with faux pity. Tom just looked at the ground, his ears turning red. "1 hot dog, please," Jessica said, her eyes glittering with malice. As I slapped the hot dog onto a bun and handed it to her, she leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper only I could hear. "Careful you don't drop it, thief." I didn't flinch. I just stared back at her, my expression a blank wall. My lack of reaction seemed to bother her more than any outburst would have. She huffed and dragged Tom away toward the beer garden, leaving me shaking with a rage so cold, it felt like my blood was turning to ice. The betrayal was no longer just about a job. She was systematically dismantling my past, claiming every piece of my old life as her own. A week later, the universe decided to kick me again while I was down. I saw it in the local paper's tiny business section, a photo of Rick, grinning smugly, shaking the hand of a corporate suit. The headline read, "Local cafe manager promoted to district manager after record profits." My anonymous tip had done nothing. Or worse, it had triggered an investigation that Rick had somehow spun in his favor, making himself look like a hero who had rooted out a thieving employee, me, and turned the store around. Corporate hadn't seen mismanagement. They'd seen profit. They didn't care how he got it. And now he was in charge of a dozen stores. I received the unofficial confirmation a few days later from an old, friendly coworker. "He sent out a memo to all the stores in the new district," she texted. "A do not hire list for cause. Your name was at the top." He hadn't just poisoned the well in our town. He had blacklisted me from the entire company across 3 counties. I was completely and utterly trapped. That night, I didn't even have the energy for anger. All I felt was the crushing weight of defeat. My mom must have seen the despair on my face. "Why don't you make yourself useful and clear out those old boxes of your grandmother's from the garage?" she said, her tone more tired than cruel. "The dust is attracting spiders." And so I found myself in the dusty, spider-webbed corner of our garage, half-heartedly sorting through boxes of yellowed linens and tarnished silverware. In the bottom of a hat box that smelled of lavender and mothballs, my fingers brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope. It wasn't a birthday card or a chatty letter. It was from a law firm, addressed to me, care of my grandmother. It was dated 5 years ago, right after her funeral, a time when I was so lost in grief I'd let my parents handle all her affairs. My hands trembled as I slid it open. The paper was thick and official. It was full of legal jargon I barely understood, but a few phrases jumped out. Upon the passing of your grandfather, Arthur Kensington, his full portfolio, held in trust by your grandmother, Evelyn Walsh. In the event of her passing, 40% of all shares in Kensington Grand Hotels are to be transferred to his sole grandchild, Maya Walsh. I read it again and a third time. My mother's maiden name was Walsh, my grandmother's name. My grandfather, Arthur Kensington, was a man I'd never met. A wealthy, reclusive figure my mother had cut ties with long before I was born. I always assumed he was just a story. He was real. And he had left me a fortune, not cash, but something far more powerful. A 40% stake in one of the country's most prestigious luxury hotel chains. I sank down onto a dusty stack of old newspapers, the letter shaking in my hand. The garage felt like it was spinning. The hopelessness that had clung to me for months evaporated, replaced by a dizzying, electrifying surge of power. It wasn't just money, it was a weapon. It was an empire. My mind, which had been so clouded with defeat, was suddenly crystal clear. I couldn't just walk into a boardroom as Maya, the disgraced barista. They would never take me seriously. I had to become someone else. That night, back in my room, I didn't open job boards. I opened the admissions page for the State University's online MBA program. I filled out the application not as Maya Davis, but using my mother's maiden name, the name on the letter, Maya Walsh. The next morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to the university to enroll. The second was to the law firm on the letterhead. Yes, I said, my voice steady and firm. A voice I barely recognized as my own. I'd like to speak to someone about the Arthur Kensington estate. And I need to arrange to be an anonymous consultant for the board of Kensington Grand Hotels. It's time I started learning the family business. My war was no longer about a small-town cafe. I was about to fight them on a battlefield they didn't even know existed. The next 2 years were a crucible. My days were a blur of online lectures, case studies, and corporate finance textbooks. My nights were spent on secure video calls with the board of Kensington Grand Hotels, not as an owner, but as CW, their sharp, insightful, and entirely anonymous new consultant. I learned the language of power, the intricate dance of leverage and acquisitions. I absorbed legalese and market analysis like a sponge, the dry, complex material fueling a fire within me. The girl who used to worry about balancing a cash drawer was now modeling hostile takeovers. With the guidance of my grandfather's ancient, shark-like lawyers, I began to move my pieces across the board. We didn't sell my hotel shares, we leveraged them. Using my 40% stake in Kensington as collateral, I secured the capital to execute a quiet, methodical acquisition of Sip and Savor, the national parent company of the very cafe chain that had discarded me. It took 18 months. When the final papers were signed, no one on the ground knew the company had a new, silent majority shareholder. No one knew that Rick's entire district now belonged to me. With the power secured, the final phase of my plan began. The transformation. Maya Davis, the mousy, heartbroken barista, had to be buried forever. I flew to New York with a suitcase full of cash and a single objective, to become someone else. An army of stylists descended upon me. My long, unruly brown hair was cut and dyed, emerging as a sleek, dark chocolate bob that grazed my jawline. I learned the art of makeup, not to be prettier, but to be sharper. A bold red lip for authority. A subtle contour to harden the soft lines of my face. My wardrobe was purged. The worn jeans and faded t-shirts were replaced with tailored sheath dresses, silk blouses, and exquisitely cut blazers. I learned that a pair of Christian Louboutin stilettos didn't just make you taller. They changed the way you walked, the way you carried yourself. They announced your arrival with a quiet, confident click-clack on the floor. Finally, I shed my name. Maya was the girl who cried in the rain. My middle name, my grandmother's name, was Catherine. I would be Catherine Walsh. Cool, untouchable, and powerful. Catherine was the woman who owned the storm. My first official act as the unseen owner of Sip and Savor was to schedule a surprise corporate performance review for the Northwood District. I would be conducting it myself, under the guise of the new executive regional director. Walking back into that cafe was a surreal experience. It smelled the same: stale coffee, sugar, and the faint scent of lemon cleaner. But I was different. I was Catherine. I pushed open the glass door, and the chatter in the cafe died down as heads turned. The baristas, all new faces, snapped to attention. I saw the flash of panic and awe in their eyes as they took in my tailored Armani suit and the expensive leather portfolio in my hand. "I'm Catherine Walsh," I announced, my voice calm and clear, echoing slightly in the suddenly silent room. "I'm the new executive regional director. Please inform your district manager, Rick Malden, that I am here for his immediate performance review." 10 minutes later, Rick bustled in, sweat beading on his upper lip. He had gained weight and his suit was tighter than ever, but he wore the same smug, self-important air. He skidded to a halt when he saw me, his eyes widening as they scanned my expensive suit and shoes. There wasn't a flicker of recognition. He just saw power. "Miss Walsh, a pleasure. We weren't expecting you," he gushed, extending a clammy hand. I shook it briefly, my touch firm and cool. "Good. A prepared performance is rarely an honest one," I said, gesturing to the small table where I'd set up my portfolio. "Please sit." He did, his sycophantic smile plastered on his face. "I think you'll find our district is a model of efficiency and profit," he began, launching into a prepackaged speech. I let him talk for a few minutes before cutting him off. "Your numbers are impressive," I conceded, my voice flat, "but profit is often a byproduct of a strong, loyal team. Tell me about your staff retention. What's your secret to inspiring such loyalty?" "Ah, yes. It's all about creating a culture of accountability," he said, puffing out his chest. "We reward hard work and we deal with problems decisively. For instance, a few years back, we had a major internal theft issue. A long-term employee, someone we all trusted. It was a tough situation, but my star supervisor, Jessica, brought it to my attention. Together, we handled it, removed the bad apple, and the store's performance skyrocketed. She's a real asset. In fact, I'd love for you to meet her." An icy thrill shot down my spine. It was even more perfect than I'd imagined. "Please call her in," I said, my lips curving into a serene smile. Jessica arrived looking flustered and excited. She had traded her barista apron for a slightly too tight manager's pantsuit. She stared at me with undisguised awe, her eyes zeroing in on my designer handbag. "Jessica, this is Miss Catherine Walsh, our new executive director," Rick said importantly. "It is an absolute honor to meet you, Miss Walsh," Jessica gushed. "I love your suit. Is that a Celine portfolio? Your taste is exquisite." "Thank you, Jessica," I said, my smile never wavering. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my steepled fingers. "Rick was just telling me about how you two handled a difficult employee theft situation a few years ago. He credits you with saving this store. Tell me your version." She beamed, taking the bait completely. For the next 10 minutes, they spun a glorious tale of their own heroism, painting a detailed picture of the devious, manipulative thief who had almost ruined them. They described her crocodile tears, her denials, her ultimate cowardly exit. I listened to them bury themselves, my heart pounding with a cold, triumphant rhythm. They had no idea they were confessing. They had no idea they were sitting across from the ghost they thought they'd exorcised. They were trying to impress Catherine Walsh, but all they were doing was handing Maya Davis the shovel to dig their graves. The next morning, I returned to the cafe. The air was thick with nervous tension. I had called a mandatory, all-hands staff meeting for 9 a.m. sharp. The dozen or so employees from across the district stood awkwardly clutching coffee mugs, their eyes darting between me and the large presentation monitor I'd had installed the night before. Rick and Jessica stood near the front looking smug. They clearly believed this meeting was their coronation, a chance for the new executive director to publicly praise their supposed success. Jessica even gave me a conspiratorial wink, as if we were partners in this new era of excellence. I gave her a thin, cold smile in return. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice crisp and commanding, echoing in the quiet room. "I've completed my preliminary review of the Northwood District, and I've discovered some irregularities. This meeting is about accountability." A nervous murmur rippled through the staff. Rick's smile tightened slightly. Let's start with store finances, I said, clicking a button on the remote in my hand. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen showing inventory write-offs and supply orders. Rick, can you explain why this store consistently reports spoilage rates 30% higher than the company average, yet your supply orders for those same items are mysteriously low? Or why you signed off on paying invoices for espresso machine maintenance from a company that, according to the state, ceased to exist 2 years ago? I clicked again, showing scanned copies of the fake invoices next to a screenshot of his public gambling debts. It almost looks like someone was fabricating expenses and pocketing the cash. About $500 a week, by my estimate. Rick went pale, sputtering. Now, wait a minute, that's just creative accounting. I ignored him, turning my attention to Jessica. And Jessica, you have an incredible number of positive online customer reviews. Truly stellar. It's a shame that our tech department traced the IP address of over 90% of them back to the computer in this store's back office. Jessica's face flushed a blotchy red. I was just trying to boost morale. You were fabricating performance metrics to justify your promotions, I stated flatly. The professional smiles were gone. In their place was the dawning horror of two rats caught in a trap. The staff was silent, their eyes wide. They were watching the systematic, professional dismantling of their bosses. But I was just getting started. However, I continued, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. This isn't just about financial mismanagement. This is about the culture of accountability you two have fostered. A culture you were so proud to tell me about yesterday. Let's talk about the real reason for this store's turnaround. Let's talk about the $516 that went missing 3 years ago. A genuine collective gasp went through the room. Rick and Jessica stared at me, frozen. You see, as the new majority shareholder of this company, I said, letting that information hang in the air for a moment, I have access to everything. Old servers, archive data, things you thought were long gone. It's amazing what a good digital forensics team can recover from conveniently corrupted hard drive. I aimed the remote at the screen and pressed play. The image that flickered to life was grainy, time-stamped from 3 years ago. It was the view from the security camera they thought had been disabled. It showed Rick at the register, quickly pocketing wads of cash. It showed Jessica standing lookout by the door. It showed them both laughing as Jessica fiddled with the wires beneath the counter, causing the feed to cut out. The room was utterly silent, save for the tinny audio from the screen. But I wasn't done. The video is damning, I said, but I find the audio is so much more illustrative. I pressed another button. A new sound filled the cafe. It was the sound of rain, and then their voices, cruel and triumphant, from the recording my phone had captured as I stood broken in the alley. I can't believe how easy that was, Jessica's voice chirped through the speakers. Her face, she looked like a lost puppy. Rick's booming laugh followed. Here's your cut. The look on her face was worth the other half. Jessica made a small, strangled noise, her hand flying to her mouth. Rick looked like he was going to be sick. The staff stared, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. They were looking at their bosses, their leaders, as the petty, cruel criminals they truly were. I turned off the monitor and the room plunged back into a heavy, suffocating silence. I walked slowly from behind the counter, stopping directly in front of them. I looked at Rick. Then my gaze settled on Jessica, who was trembling, her eyes wide with terror. This was it, the moment. I pushed my sleek, dark hair back from my face. I let the hard, clipped cadence of Catherine Walsh fall away and let my true voice, the one she would remember, emerge, low and vibrating with years of suppressed rage. You said she looked like a lost puppy, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the room. You told him the look on my face was worth it. Recognition is a funny thing. It's not a thunderclap, it's a slow, sickening dawn. I saw it happen in real time. The confusion in Jessica's eyes, the slight furrow of her brow as my voice registered, and then the utter, soul-shattering horror as her brain connected the woman in the $1,000 suit with the girl she had destroyed over a few $100s. Her face crumpled, the blood draining from it until she was as white as a sheet. Rick stared, his jaw hanging open, comprehension dawning a second later. Maya, he choked out. Rick Malden and Jessica Miller, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute authority, hard as steel. You are both fired, effective immediately, for gross misconduct, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. As if on cue, the front door opened and two broad-shouldered security guards in black suits stepped inside. I had hired them for this exact moment. I gave them a slight nod. No, please, Jessica sobbed, lunging forward. Maya, I'm so sorry, please. Rick just stood there, paralyzed, a statue of his own ruin. The guards were professional and efficient. They each took an arm and began escorting the hysterical Jessica and the catatonic Rick toward the door, past the stunned faces of the employees they used to command. As they were hauled out into the morning sun, I walked over to the community bulletin board. I took down the Employee of the Month schedule and, with 4 sharp clicks of a staple gun, posted 2 laminated notices for all to see: termination of employment, cause, theft, and fraud. The entire staff watched, silent and wide-eyed. They hadn't just witnessed a firing, they had witnessed a resurrection. A week passed, a week in which my lawyers cleaned up the legal mess at Sip and Savor, corporate memos were sent, and a competent new district manager was appointed. I spent that week in my real office, the one on the 80th floor of the Kensington Grand Hotel Tower. It was a world away from the lingering smell of burnt coffee and betrayal. Here, the air was scented with expensive vanilla candles and old leather, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the city far below, viewed through a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass. My new life had a rhythm of calm, controlled power, which is why I was so surprised when my head of security buzzed my intercom, his voice tight. Ma'am, I apologize. There are 2 individuals in the lobby causing a disturbance, a Rick Malden and a Jessica Miller. They're demanding to see you. I leaned back in my plush leather chair. I should have known they'd try. It's all right, Frank, I said, my voice even. Send them up. I'll see them. It was better to finish this once and for all. They were escorted in 5 minutes later, and the sight of them was jarring against the polished mahogany and chrome of my office. They looked ruined. Rick's suit was wrinkled and looked too big for him, as if he'd lost weight from stress alone. Jessica was a ghost of her former self. Her hair was a mess. Her face was pale and blotchy, without its usual mask of makeup, and her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. They stood on the edge of my vast Persian rug like 2 shipwreck survivors who had washed up on the shores of a hostile alien land. Maya, Rick began, his voice raspy. He took a hesitant step forward. We just wanted to talk to you, to explain. I said nothing. I simply picked up a crystal nail file from my desk and began to leisurely shape my thumbnail, my gaze focused on my hand. The silence unnerved them, and Jessica burst forward, words tumbling from her mouth in a desperate torrent. We were so stupid, Maya, so stupid. Rick was in debt, and I was scared of being stuck. I was jealous of you, of how easy everything seemed for you. It was a mistake. A horrible, terrible mistake. We'll give it all back, Rick pleaded, his voice cracking. The $500, I have some savings. Not a lot, but it's yours, all of it. Just tell people it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you were wrong about us. Jessica fell to her knees then, a theatrical, pathetic gesture that sent a wave of revulsion through me. She crawled the last few feet and clutched at the hem of my tailored trousers, her tears splashing onto the toe of my expensive designer shoes. I'll confess, she sobbed, looking up at me, her face a grotesque mask of sorrow. I'll post it online. I'll tell everyone what a horrible person I am, what we did. I'll do anything. Please, Maya, you can't just destroy our entire lives over this. We're begging you. Their pleas, their tears, their desperate, self-serving apologies, they all washed over me, and I felt absolutely nothing. The wounds they had carved into me had long since scarred over, leaving smooth, impenetrable armor. There was no pain left for them to touch. I placed the nail file down with a soft click. I let their sobs hang in the opulent silence of the room for a long, heavy moment. Then, slowly, I stood up. I walked past them, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet, and went to the massive wall of glass. I placed my hand on the cool, solid pane and looked down at the city spread out before me like a map of my new kingdom. I could see the block where the cafe was, a tiny, insignificant speck from this height. I could see the rooftop of the apartment building I was evicted from. I saw the whole city that they had tried to turn into my prison, a city that was now at my feet. They hadn't just framed me for theft. They had tried to murder my future. They had tried to suffocate my spirit. And they were begging for forgiveness from a woman they had killed. The woman standing here was someone else entirely. Finally, I turned back to them. Their tear-streaked faces were filled with a desperate, flickering hope. They saw my silence, my calm, and mistook it for consideration. They thought they had a chance. I looked at Rick, the pathetic, greedy coward. I looked at Jessica, kneeling at my feet like a penitent sinner. My expression was serene. My heart was a block of ice. I gave them my final answer. My final word. No. The single syllable dropped into the room with the weight of a guillotine blade. It wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was a simple, clinical, and absolute fact. It was the closing of a book, the turning of a key in a lock, the final closing of a door they would never be allowed to open again. I watched the last bit of hope drain from their eyes. I watched them finally, truly understand that their lives, as they knew them, were over. There was no appeal. There was no negotiation. There was only the consequences of their own actions and the woman they had created. I pressed the silent button on my desk. My security chief, Frank, opened the door immediately. "Frank," I said, my voice perfectly calm as I turned back to the view. "Please show Mr. Malden and Miss Miller out. They've concluded their business here, and ensure they never set foot in any Kensington Grand property again." I didn't watch them get pulled to their feet. I didn't listen to their renewed wails of despair. I just listened to their footsteps and their fading cries as they were permanently removed from my life. The heavy office door clicked shut, and the silence returned. It was a clean, peaceful, and perfect silence. 6 months later, the rhythm of my life was one of quiet, thriving peace. I sat in my corner office, the late afternoon sun casting long golden stripes across the floor. The faint, warm scent of a vanilla bean candle filled the air, a constant comfort that had replaced the lingering smell of burnt coffee in my memory. On my desk lay the quarterly reports for my empire. The Sip and Savor franchise, under new, competent leadership, was reporting its highest profits in a decade. The Kensington Grand Hotel in Monaco was reporting record bookings for the summer. Everything was growing. Everything was moving forward. My executive assistant knocked softly and entered, placing a small stack of mail on my desk. Tucked between investment bulletins and board meeting invitations was a simple, cream-colored card. There was no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from Sarah, a quiet barista who had always been kind to me at the cafe, the one who had secretly texted me about Rick's memo all those years ago. I slid a nail under the seal and opened it. "Maya," it began, and the use of my real name made me smile. The story, in its entirety, had eventually come out. "I don't know if you'll get this, but I had to try. I'm the new manager at the Northwood store now. I wanted to thank you. You didn't just fix things for yourself. You made it a place people actually enjoy working at again. Things are good here. I hope things are good for you too." A small photograph fluttered out from the card and onto my desk. I picked it up. It was a picture of the cafe's community bulletin board, but instead of the single fading Employee of the Month photo, it was now covered in pictures of smiling employees, with handwritten notes of praise pinned next to each one. It was vibrant and full of life, a true team. My fingers went to my neck, closing around the familiar solid shape of the old brass key. It rested against the soft silk of my blouse, a stark contrast to the threadbare, coffee-stained uniform it used to hang over. The key hadn't been a promise of magic or unearned luck. It had been a key to a door within myself, the door to the person I could become once I stopped letting others write my story. I looked at the photo of the happy employees, then at the sprawling city beyond my window, and a deep, genuine smile spread across my face. Everything had aligned, not by fate, but by design. My design. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose, I closed my laptop. The day's work was done. I stood, gathered my things, and walked out of the quiet office, the city lights beginning to glitter below me like a carpet of scattered diamonds. I headed home to my penthouse, to a life I had built with my own two hands. The ghosts of Rick and Jessica were gone, not even whispers in the furthest corners of my mind. Their betrayal was no longer the foundation of my life. It was merely the ashes from which my empire had risen. And tomorrow I knew I would wake up and continue to build.